The ER doors burst open at 12:07 a.m. and a Navy SEAL team did not ask for the trauma chief. They asked for one nurse by name, Mara Quinn, and before that night was over, a dying man would force her to face the one truth she had spent years surviving without. Some of the dead are not gone. They are waiting. If you have ever worked a night shift, sat in a hospital hallway, or carried grief so long it started to feel like routine, this story will hit somewhere deep. The lights were too bright. The coffee had gone cold. Outside the harbor, wind pressed against the ambulance bay doors. Inside, monitors whispered nurses moved on instinct, and Mara thought she was walking through one more ordinary shift. She was wrong. Stay with me to the end, like this video, and tell me where you're watching from. She was wrong. At 12:07 a.m. Ordinary had ended with the sound of boots and a gurney wheel rattling over the threshold hard enough to make the whole emergency department look up. The old rhythm of the night never quite returned after that. It only pretended to. Mayport Harbor Medical Center sat close enough to the water that the harbor air sometimes slipped in through the ambulance bay and rode the halls for a few seconds before the smell of bleach and plastic swallowed it. Mara Quinn had worked there long enough to know every layer of that air. Antiseptic, burnt coffee, latex, sweat, fear, relief, the strange metallic edge that clung to trauma rooms after blood hit the floor. She knew the building by sound, too, the elevator chime near imaging that always lagged half a beat, the quick double chirp of a monitor with a loose lead, the soft rattle of supply carts rolling across tile at 3 in the morning. She knew this place. That was why the wrongness of that man saying her name had settled so deep under her ribs. Now she stood at the foot of Trauma 2 with one pair of gloves stripped off and another still clinging damply to her wrists. Around her, the room was being reset with the brutal efficiency hospital's reserve for disaster. Fresh linens, new suction tubing, bloody gauze swept into red bags. A nurse mopping the floor where dark arcs of blood had already begun to thin under disinfectant. Nothing stops for long in an emergency department. Not grief, not confusion, not even the kind that walks in wearing body armor. Dr. Nate Hollis was dictating sharp instructions near the desk, still angry enough that every other word landed with a little extra force. I want labs copied to hard print if the system is being restricted. And if anyone from Federal whatever thinks they are touching my charting process again, they can come say it to my face. One of the younger residents murmured something careful. Hollis snapped back without looking at him. No, that was not a request. Mara bent to pick up a pack of unopened saline someone had knocked beneath the counter during the rush. Her knees complained the way they always did at the end of a long night. 52 was not old, but trauma nursing had a way of counting years in joints and scar tissue. She set the saline back in the bin, pushed a loose strand of dark hair behind one ear, and forced her breathing to slow. Jess Molina found her a minute later. Jess had been on nights for less than a year, bright-eyed and observant in the way new nurses were before the job either hardened them or hollowed them out. She hovered near the doorway with a chart clutched against her scrub top. "You okay?" Mara looked up. "Fine." Jess gave her the smallest look. "You say that the same way people say they're not in pain when their arm is bent backward." Mara almost smiled, but it never fully arrived. "How's bed 9? Chest pain guy is stable. Cardiology wants a repeat troponin. His wife keeps asking if stable means good. What did you tell her?" "That stable means we have time." Mara nodded once. "Good answer." Jess shifted her weight. Her eyes dropped briefly to Mara's hands, maybe to the faint tremor she was trying not to notice, maybe to the place on her wrist where the wounded man had grabbed her. "He really knew your name. Apparently. You know him." "No." The word came too fast. Jess heard it. Mara could tell. Before either of them could say more, one of the transport orderlies pushed a man from triage past the door, cursing quietly because the IV pole wheel kept catching on tile seams. Down the hall, someone called for respiratory. A woman near the waiting room asked if her son could have water. The department breathed back into motion. That was the mercy of work. It gave the hand something to do while the mind stumbled behind. Mara checked on the chest pain patient. Started antibiotics for a fisherman with a hand puncture from a rusted hook. Corrected a medication dosage on a computer terminal while the coffee on the desk beside it turned cold and bitter. She spoke to a mother whose teenage daughter had sliced her palm open on broken glass, and to a sailor from the base who kept apologizing for bleeding on the floor, as if politeness could undo an injury. Her body moved through the familiar sequence without hesitation. Vitals, lines, chart, reassure, recheck, document. But every quiet second drew her mind back to the same image. Pale lips. A forearm marked with a black crescent cradling a silver star. A dying stranger whispering her name as if it had kept him alive. By the time dawn began to bleach the eastern windows, the hospital had the washed-out look every building gets after a long night. The fluorescent glare felt tired now. The coffee in the break room had burned down to something almost medicinal. Day shift voices started gathering at the nurses' station in little bursts of gossip and fatigue. Someone laughed too loudly near pediatrics from pure exhaustion. Mara signed off her last chart and stood for a moment with the pen still in her hand. "You heading out?" Jess asked. Not yet. Jess knew better than to ask where. She only said, "You want me to cover your rooms? I'm off the clock." That wasn't my question. Mara capped the pen. 10 minutes. Jess gave a quick nod. "Take 20 if you need it." Recovery was quieter than the emergency department, but not softer. Recovery had its own kind of tension. The violence was usually over by the time people arrived there. What remained was the waiting. The fragile space after surgery, when bodies either chose the path back or drifted toward something colder. A man in a dark jacket stood outside room 314. Not local police. Not hospital security. Clean haircut. Government posture. The kind of stillness that was more alert than relaxed. He checked her badge once, then stepped aside without a word. Inside, the room smelled of warmed IV fluid, alcohol wipes, and the faint electrical heat of monitors. The patient lay angled slightly upright, pale against white sheets, one arm threaded with fluids and blood oxygen prongs under his nose. In the thin gray light, he looked younger than he had under the emergency room glare. Early 40s, maybe. Hard weather in his face. Dark hair with a little silver at the temples. Old scars on one forearm. New ones in the set of his mouth. His eyes were closed when she entered, but they opened before she spoke. "You came back." Mara remained standing. "Start with your name." He shifted a fraction, pain tightening every line around his eyes. Jonah Cross. Nothing inside her answered to that. No old memory, no family story, no face from a funeral or a photograph or a half-forgotten summer. "Why did you ask for me?" His voice was rough from blood loss and intubation. "Because if they took me anywhere else, I might not have had long enough." "For what?" "To get to you." The reply landed in the room and stayed there. Mara pulled the visitor chair closer, but she did not sit yet. "Who are you to me?" He looked at her for a long second, not searching, not guessing. Knowing. "I'm your brother." It was such a clean sentence. No ornament. No explanation wrapped around it. Just 4 words that struck the center of the life she had known and left a crack running through it. Mara let out a breath that was almost a laugh, except nothing about it was amused. "No. Yes. I don't have a brother." Jonah swallowed eyes never leaving hers. "Our father was Patrick Quinn." Now she sat because standing had suddenly become too difficult to make look casual. Patrick Quinn had been dead 7 years. A heart that failed in a county hospital 2 states away. A man who complained about the coffee and refused to admit he was scared. Mara had signed the paperwork. She had boxed up the tools. She had gone through his drawers and thrown away receipts that smelled faintly of old engine oil. She knew the shape of her father's absence. She had built herself around it. "No," she said again, sharper this time. My father was a diesel mechanic from Biloxi. He fixed engines and lied about how much he drank. That was his whole talent set. Jonah's tired mouth moved in something that almost became a smile, but did not. Sometimes. Mara's shoulders went cold. What does that mean? It means that was the part he wanted visible. Jonah shifted slightly against the pillow and winced. The movement tugged at the fresh incision in his abdomen. Mara noticed automatically. It irritated her that she noticed. He worked harbors, boats, fuel lines, loading slips, and other things. What other things? Things that never made paperwork. She stared at him, trying to decide where grief made people inventive and where pain made them truthful. He did not look like a fantasist. That made him more dangerous, not less. My father never mentioned you. My mother never wanted him mentioned at all. Mara folded her arms. Convenient. Jonah breathed in slowly through the pain, let it out. You curl your left hand when you're angry. Her hand tightened at once, fingers folding inward before she caught herself. Heat moved up her neck. He saw it. He said you got that from him. The room seemed to narrow a little. Don't, Mara said. Do not come into my hospital and start putting words in my father's mouth. He talked about you when he drank too much. Not often, never enough, but he did. Mara stood abruptly, the chair legs scraping the floor. This is insane. Jonah watched her without flinching. He gave you a brass compass. Everything in her stopped. No one knew about the compass because it had never mattered enough to mention. It sat at the bottom of her locker with old hair ties, a stale protein bar, and a backup pair of reading glasses. A scratched brass thing her father had pressed into her hand when she was 16 after one of their many unfinished arguments. It never pointed north. She had told him it was broken. He had smiled that unreadable smile of his and said, "Maybe north isn't the problem." Jonah's voice was quieter now, scratched on the casing, heavy for its size. Needle drifts. Mara said nothing. He gave me one too. The silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt loaded, like the room itself had leaned in. How do you know that? She asked, finally. Because mine broke when I was 17, and he acted like he'd broken something larger than metal, because he said your copy would probably outlive both of us. Jonah lifted one hand a few inches off the blanket and let it fall back. Because when he talked about the daughter he couldn't keep in one place, he sounded proud and guilty at the same time. That one hurt in a place she had not prepared to defend. Proud and guilty. Yes. That sounded like Patrick Quinn more than she wanted it to. Mara moved to the window and looked down over the hospital parking deck where morning was beginning to collect on windshields and concrete. Jacksonville was waking up beyond the harbor cranes, black against a thin stripe of pale sky. Somewhere below, an ambulance backed into the bay with a mechanical whine. All of it kept going. Cars, shift changes, coffee orders, chest pain paperwork. The ordinary machinery of the world. She put one hand against the glass and found it cool. Why now? She asked without turning. Because names are surfacing. Jonah's voice had roughened. Old support chains, family links, safe contacts, things that were supposed to die years ago. Somebody started digging in the wrong archive. Archive. That's what they called it. She turned back toward him. Who is they? Jonah looked towards the door, then back at her. People who stopped being one thing a long time ago. Contractors. Retrieval teams. Men who stayed useful after the mission ended. Men who learned that old secrets can still pay. The language was vague, but the conviction behind it was not. Mara felt anger rise, because anger was easier than uncertainty. And Chief Tanner. He belongs to what exactly? He belongs to the part that is still trying to keep bodies from stacking up. That's not an answer. It's the one I have strength for. Something in the bluntness of that nearly reached her. Not enough to trust him. Enough to make leaving harder. She went to the bedside and checked his IV lines on instinct. The tape at one site was lifting. She smoothed it down with 2 efficient fingers. His skin was still too cool. Pulse still too fast. No business talking this much yet. You need to rest. I needed you to hear me first. You still haven't given me a reason to believe any of this." Jonah's eyes held hers, opened the compass. Mara felt the words rather than heard them. "What?" "The back plate. It opens." She stared at him. He closed his eyes for a second, then opened them again with effort. He left things in old places. That was how he built contingencies. If he couldn't stay alive long enough to explain them himself, he buried them where only the right person would look. My father was many things. Organized was not one of them. Jonah gave the faintest breath of dry amusement and then winced for it. Not in the house, no. That was almost too specific. Too familiar in a way she had not invited. Patrick Quinn had left tools where they fell coffee cups in wrong rooms, receipts crumpled in shirt pockets, one sock in every corner of the house except the laundry basket. Yet, every time Mara had ever asked where the spare boat keys were, he had known. Every time a storm came in off the Gulf, he had checked locks and windows in the same exact order. Messy in the visible places, precise in the hidden ones. A knock sounded at the door. Chief Rafe Tanner stepped in without waiting for permission. In daylight he looked less theatrical than he had in tactical gear, which somehow made him more unsettling. Tall, thick through the shoulders, pale scar along the jaw, eyes trained to read a room before entering it. He took in Mara by the window, Jonah against the pillows, and the charged quiet between them. "This visit is over." Mara turned. "You don't get to decide that." Tanner's gaze shifted to Jonah. "You need recovery." Jonah said nothing. He only looked back with the exhausted calm of someone who had already spent whatever leverage he had. Mara stepped toward Tanner. "He says he's my brother." Tanner did not answer immediately. That silence was answer enough to set her temper off. "You knew." "I knew it was possible." That is the careful kind of sentence people use when they have been lying by omission for too long. One side of Tanner's mouth tightened. "Nurse Quinn, this situation did not arrive with clean options. No, it arrived bleeding through my trauma bay and saying my name." For a second she thought he might stonewall again. Then he said quieter than before, "Your father left more than one life behind." That was not a denial. It was worse. Mara looked from Tanner to Jonah and back again. Both men were tired. Both were hurt in different ways. Both knew more about her family than she did. Rage flared hot enough to steady her. "I want facts." Tanner glanced toward the monitor over Jonah's bed, then toward the hall. "What you want and what can be said in a hospital are not the same. Do not talk to me like I'm a civilian in the wrong hallway." A flicker crossed his face. Respect, maybe. Or resignation. Then, "Hear this clearly," he said. "If your father left you something, find it. If Jonah crossed 2 states and a gunshot wound to get here, take that seriously. And if anyone asks you questions outside your normal life in the next 24 hours, answer none of them." Mara went very still. "That sounds like a threat." "It's not. It sounds like one. It's a warning." She held his gaze long enough that the room seemed to sharpen around it. Then she looked back at Jonah. He was watching her with the drained patience of a man who had gambled everything on a conversation and did not have enough blood left to push harder. "Rest," she said again more quietly this time. He nodded once. Mara left the room without looking at Tanner again, but she could feel him a step behind her in the hall. Outside the door she stopped. "If there is anything happening around my family, you tell me before you tell anybody in a suit." Tanner answered after a beat. Understood. She did not thank him. She walked away. Her locker sat in a staff alcove off the emergency department, dented near the bottom from a stretcher that had clipped it years earlier. She opened it with fingers that looked steady from a distance and dug beneath folded scrubs a rain shell and the old paperback she kept for slow nights but never managed to read. The compass was where she had left it. Brass, dulled by time, scratched near the hinge, heavier than it needed to be. She held it in her palm for a long moment, feeling the old familiar weight of something that had belonged to her father before it belonged to her. Memory moved through her in thin flashes. Patrick at the kitchen table with grease under his nails. Patrick checking the back door lock twice during storms. Patrick smiling without answering when she asked where he had really been that week. The back plate looked seamless unless the light caught it just right. Mara took the compass into the nearest empty supply closet and shut the door behind her. Fluorescent light hummed overhead. Shelves of saline and sterile dressings boxed her in on all sides. The whole room smelled faintly of cardboard and disinfectant. She found a hemostat on a tray, worked the tip into the seam and pressed. Nothing. She changed angle, pressed again harder this time. A tiny metallic click. Her breath stopped. The plate gave under her thumb. Inside, folded smaller than a postage stamp, lay a strip of waterproof paper gone faintly yellow with age. Mara unfolded it with hands that no longer felt fully her own. 3 words in Patrick Quinn's square blocky handwriting. If he comes, listen. She read it once. Then again. Then a third time because the meaning did not change, but the world around it had. Not a guess. Not a coincidence. Not a desperate man inventing family from morphine and blood loss. Her father had known someone would come. Had expected it. Had reached years forward from the grave and placed a sentence in her hand like a delayed order. A knock sounded against the closet door. Mara Jess's voice muffled through wood. "You in there?" Mara folded the note too quickly and caught the edge on her finger. A bright bead of blood rose. She pressed it against a gauze pad from the shelf without taking her eyes off the paper. "Yeah, you okay?" The question hovered there, too honest for a hallway. Mara looked down at the compass open in her hand, at the note, at the tiny blood smear blooming across the gauze. "No," she nearly said. Instead, she answered, "Fine, be right out." Jess lingered just long enough for Mara to hear concern in the silence. Then footsteps moved away. Mara slipped the note into her scrub pocket, closed the compass, replaced the hemostat exactly where she had found it, and opened the door. The hallway looked unchanged. Nurses crossing toward triage. Environmental services pushing a cart. A volunteer wheeling fresh blankets toward the pediatrics. The ordinary face of the hospital had returned completely, only she had not. Chief Tanner was waiting near the elevators. His eyes flicked once to her pocket, then back to her face. He did not need to ask. "You found something." Mara stopped in front of him. "You knew there was a message. I suspected he left one. That is starting to sound like your favorite word." He let that pass. "What did it say?" She did not answer. Tanner nodded once, as if the silence confirmed enough. "Good. Good." The anger came back clean and fast. "You drag a bleeding man into my ER. He tells me he's my brother. My dead father apparently planned for this, and your response is good. It means your father wanted you informed, not blind. My father lost the right to choose what I know when he died." Tanner looked at her for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped into something almost careful. "Maybe. But dead men still leave consequences." Mara's hand went to the compass in her pocket. She felt the shape of it through thin fabric. Old brass, bad needle, hidden hinge. The whole weight of a life she had not understood. Tanner. "Yes. If any of this reaches my family before it reaches me, I promise you I will make myself a very specific problem in your life." Something like grim approval touched his expression for a second. Understood. That was the closest thing to honesty either of them had offered all morning. Mara walked past him, signed out at the desk, and stepped into the washed gold light of early morning. The harbor wind caught at her scrub top and carried the smell of salt and diesel from the river. Her car sat where she had left it 12 hours earlier, windshield filmed with a fine dusting of coastal grit. She unlocked it, slid into the driver's seat, and closed the door on the hospital. For a moment, she only sat there with both hands on the wheel. In her pocket, the compass pressed against her hip. The note rested folded against it like a pulse. "If he comes, listen." Her father's handwriting had always been practical. No loops, no softness. Words built like they expected to be obeyed. Mara started the engine and pulled out of the garage. Traffic was beginning to thicken on the roads around the hospital. Delivery trucks, shift workers, sailors from the base, a woman in business clothes drinking coffee at a red light like she had been awake since yesterday. The world looked completely intact. But by the time Mara turned onto her street, she was no longer driving toward a normal morning. She was driving toward the hallway closet in her own house, toward old boxes stacked high and taped shut, toward every receipt and photograph and half-forgotten object she had once told herself was too inconvenient to sort through. Now, they did not feel inconvenient at all. They felt like evidence. By the time she let herself into the house, the light had changed. Morning in Jacksonville had a way of arriving half-humid, half-metallic, with brightness that bounced off parked cars and stucco walls before it found the windows. Mara set her keys in the ceramic bowl by the door and stood still for a moment in the quiet. The bungalow smelled faintly of old coffee laundry detergent and the lemon oil she used on the wood floors when she was trying to convince herself she still had control over small things. Everything in the room sat where it belonged. The folded throw on the couch, the framed photographs on the shelf, the unopened mail stacked beneath the fruit bowl, the blue casserole dish Emma had forgotten, and Tyler kept accusing her of hiding on purpose. It was the order of a life built carefully, one repetition at a time. Mara had spent years making this house feel unlike the one she grew up in. No mystery drawers, no unexplained absences, no footsteps on the porch after midnight that came with salt on them and silence in their pockets. She slipped the compass from her scrub pocket and set it on the kitchen counter beside the sink. The brass looked dull in daylight, harmless. A broken thing with a bad needle and a trick hinge. Except now it carried her father's handwriting inside it, and that changed the whole shape of it. If he comes, listen. Mara took off her shoes, went down the hallway, and pulled the folding step stool from the closet. The attic hatch sat above the linen shelf. She pushed it open, and the smell of dust and old insulation drifted down with the first dry breath of trapped years. Patrick Quinn's boxes were stacked near the back, exactly where she had shoved them after the funeral and left them. Too awkward to deal with. Too full of the kind of objects that looked meaningless until grief made them heavy. She climbed up, knees protesting, and dragged the first box toward her. Cardboard rasped against plywood. Dust broke loose and floated through the attic light in slow, lazy motes. She passed the box down, then another, then a third. By the time she carried them into the living room, a faint ache had started along the back of her shoulders. She left the attic hatch open anyway. The first box was mostly what she expected. Old utility bills folded into quarters. Insurance forms. A cracked shaving mug she vaguely remembered from the bathroom sink when she was a teenager. One of Patrick's work shirts with the sleeves rolled the way he always rolled them, too neat for a man who claimed not to care about neatness. The sight of it tightened something low in her chest. She set it aside and kept going. A marina permit from Biloxi. A receipt for marine batteries in Charleston. A map of the Gulf Coast with 2 corners torn off. A rusted key ring with 1 boat key still attached and no label to tell her what it had once opened. Nothing that said brother. Nothing that said hidden life. Nothing that said your father planned for a man to walk out of his grave and into your hospital. Mara moved to the second box. This one held photographs. Not many. Patrick had hated cameras unless he was the one holding them. Most of the prints were ordinary in the worst possible way. Mara, at age 9, with a fishing pole too big for her hands and a sunburn across her nose. Her mother Kathleen laughing in a lawn chair with the paperback upside down in her lap because Patrick had said something off-frame she had tried not to smile at and failed. One Christmas tree leaning in the corner because the stand was crooked and Patrick had insisted it was charming. Mara sat cross-legged on the rug and sorted them into piles by year by paper type, by the little clues that let a life be read backward. Her reading glasses slipped lower on her nose. Outside, a truck passed, then another. A lawnmower started somewhere up the block. The sounds of other people moving through an ordinary Tuesday made the room feel even quieter. Deep in the stack, one photograph stopped her cold. It had been taken on a dock at dusk. The color had faded into hard blues and rust brown. 3 men stood near a pylon thick with rope burn and salt crust. In the middle was Patrick, younger than she remembered him, in his last years, broader through the shoulders, head turned slightly, as if someone had called his name just before the shutter clicked. To his left stood a man in cold weather gear, half turned away. To his right stood another man, cleaner in the jaw, leaner in the body, wearing a dark cap with a small stitched emblem on the front. A black crescent, a silver star. Mara knew the face before her mind allowed the words. Cole Avery, her husband. Her dead husband. The room seemed to lose sound. The mower outside. The ticking kitchen clock. The refrigerator hum. All of it dropped away until there was only the glossy rectangle in her hand and the impossible quiet that followed recognition. Not a resemblance, not a maybe. Cole. Younger, yes. The face less lined, the mouth less tired. But it was him as clearly as if he had stepped out of the hallway instead of a photograph. The same eyes that never gave away everything they were thinking. The same way of standing that made even stillness look braced. Mara turned the photo over. Nothing on the back except a faded timestamp from 11 years earlier. 2 years before he vanished. 4 years before Patrick died. She sat motionless, the photograph trembling just slightly between her fingers. Memory started rearranging itself against her will. Cole checking the back door lock before bed on storm nights. Cole pausing before he entered a restaurant, scanning the room without seeming to. Cole taking phone calls outside and coming back in with silence clinging to him. Cole saying work when she asked too many questions. Cole smelling like salt and engine grease on trips that had supposedly been paperwork and recovery contracting. At the time, she had explained it away because married life was built partly on compromise and partly on fatigue. She had been working 12-hour shifts. Tyler had been in college. Emma had been stubborn and 16 and convinced nobody in the house understood anything. Bills had come due on schedule whether trust felt easy or not. You learn to live beside the unanswered things when the visible life needs tending. Now all of it tilted. Mara set the photograph down on the rug with care so sharp it almost became violence. The third box held paper. At first, more of the same. Tax returns. Fuel invoices. Boat repair manuals swollen from humidity. An envelope full of warranties for appliances he no longer owned. Then, under a stack of engine diagrams, she found a bundle tied with frayed twine. No stamps, no return addresses, hand-delivered. The envelopes all had P. Quinn written across the front in the same block hand. Mara untied the stack and spread the notes on the floor. Short messages, most only one line. Dock secure. Delay 48 hours. Use the west contact. Burn after reading. Slip changed. No coast road. Package moved. Assume eyes on the marina. Call only from public line. She read them once quickly, then more slowly, pulse beginning to climb. The language was all fragment and caution. No names where names should have been. No explanations. A way of speaking built to vanish after use. She could feel the pattern without fully seeing it yet. Movement, transfer, delay, route changes, eyes on the marina. Enough to make Patrick's whole life rise differently in her mind. Tucked into the middle of the bundle was a motel notepad sheet folded in half. This one was longer. If Avery misses Friday, assume breach. Do not bring family to the coast. Tell P the northern copy is no longer safe. Mara read the line 3 times before the word family stopped feeling abstract. Not family as a concept, her family. She got up too fast and had to catch herself on the edge of the coffee table. For a second, the room tilted. She stood breathing through it, one hand flat against the wood, the note still in her other hand. Cole had not just known Patrick. He had been inside whatever this was. Worse, Patrick had known Cole was inside it too. Mara crossed into the kitchen and gripped the sink until the cold edge of the counter pressed into her palms. Outside, the day had warmed enough that heat shimmered above the hood of the neighbor's car. A woman walked past with a golden retriever and waved toward the house, not realizing Mara could not manage the small automatic wave back. Her phone buzzed on the table. Tyler. For one foolish second, her heart jumped as if the caller ID might say Cole instead. She answered on the second ring. Hey. Hey, Mom, you asleep? Not anymore. Tyler laughed softly. I keep forgetting your shift schedule is made by sadists. Mara closed her eyes. The sound of his voice, ordinary and distracted, pierced through everything else. How's school? He taught history at a private middle school across town. 12-year-olds and grading rubrics and hallway chaos. A good life. A life that had nothing to do with dead networks and coded notes and men in tactical gear. Long day already, he said. One kid told me the Civil War happened in the 70s. Another tried to eat glue. Public education is in excellent hands. Private, actually. That's worse. He laughed again. Then a pause. You okay? Mara looked at the dockside photograph on the rug at Patrick, at Cole, at the crescent and star on that cap. Long night. You sound strange. I'm tired. He let the lie stand, or maybe recognized it and chose mercy. Emma called. She says you still have her casserole dish. I do. She says that means she's stopping by this weekend and taking it by force. Tell her to bring better arguments. I'll warn her. The conversation moved a little longer through safe things. Traffic. A faculty meeting. Whether Tyler had eaten breakfast. Whether Mara was planning to sleep before another shift. She let the normalcy wash over her and hated how fragile it felt now. When they hung up, she stood in the kitchen with the phone still in her hand. Then she went back to the floor and kept digging. By early afternoon, the living room had become a map. Photographs in one row, notes in another. Receipts spread by city and date. Biloxi, Charleston, Wilmington, Brunswick. Places Patrick had supposedly visited for repair work or cheap parts or quick side jobs that now looked less innocent every minute she stared at them. One photo showed a weathered boat slip under gray sky. Another, a warehouse with no signage, and a truck backed up to a loading bay. Another, Patrick beside a teenage boy with wary shoulders and sea light in his eyes. Jonah, younger by decades but unmistakable now that Mara knew how to look. Same mouth, same stubborn set to the brow. Brother, she thought, and the word still felt like a splinter under skin. The front door knocked once firm enough to put every nerve in her body on alert. Mara rose silently and crossed to the side window instead of the peephole. Through the narrow slit in the curtain, she saw Chief Rafe Tanner standing on her porch in a dark jacket, civilian clothes, this time rain threatening behind him in a low bank of coastal clouds. Of course he had found her address. Men like him always could. She opened the door, but did not step back right away. How did you get in the habit of appearing where I don't want you? Tanner glanced past her shoulder into the living room. His eyes took in the open boxes, the spread papers, the photograph of Cole near her knee. Occupational weakness. That is not charming. I wasn't aiming for charm. She moved, just enough to let him in more because she wanted answers than because she trusted him 1 inch. Tanner entered with the contained awareness of someone who never fully turned his back on a door. He did not comment on the house. He did not need to. Recognition was already there in the way his gaze settled on the motel note. You found the photograph. Mara picked it up and held it toward him. Tell me why my dead husband is standing beside my father, wearing the same mark as the man who bled across my trauma bay. Tanner looked at the picture without touching it. Rain began tapping lightly against the porch roof outside. Cole Avery worked contractor recovery along the coast before he disappeared, Tanner said. Storm response, salvage, transport. Your father crossed paths with him on jobs that did not stay civilian for long. That sounds like the polished version. It's the shortest one. I'm not in the mood for short. His gaze lifted to hers. Patrick Quinn was attached to an off-book maritime compartment for years. Retrieval, transport, quiet cleanup after missions, nobody wanted named. Cole came in through the waterside. He was good under pressure. He knew routes. He knew how to keep his head when comms failed. Mara laughed once, but there was no humor in it. So my father lied for decades, and my husband learned from him. Tanner did not correct her. She held up the notepad page. What is this? What is the northern copy? A fragment. Of what? Records, support chains, payment lines, family contacts linked to old operations. Family contacts. The phrase hit harder spoken aloud. Mara dropped the paper onto the table between them. People kept records on families. Contingencies were built that way. Do not call my children a contingency. Tanner took that without flinching. I'm not. She wanted to throw him out. She wanted to lock the door and burn every scrap of paper in the house and tell herself the entire morning had been a shared hallucination. Instead, she said, my children do not know anything about this. Good. Her head snapped up. Do not tell me what good is in my own home. Tanner looked toward the living room window as if checking the street without seeming to. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. Not softer, more direct. Your son was approached today. All the air left the room. What? By a man in a gray jacket outside the school parking lot. He asked if Tyler Avery was Cole Avery's son. Mara stared at him. The rain outside sharpened a steady tapping now. Somewhere down the block a dog barked once and went quiet. Her body stayed absolutely still, but inside that stillness something dropped hard and cold. When, this afternoon, and you're telling me now, we were confirming before I walked into your house with half a threat. This is my son. You do not confirm first. Tanner's jaw set. He was not touched. That is not the point. No, it isn't. Mara grabbed her phone from the table with fingers that were suddenly clumsy. She called Tyler, straight to voicemail. Panic rose so fast it almost blurred her vision. She called again. This time he answered slightly breathless, Mom, where are you? A pause. Driving home. Why? Put me on speaker and keep your eyes on the road. Another pause, longer now. Mom, what's wrong? Did anyone speak to you at school today? Someone you didn't know. Silence. Then the small exhale of recognition. Yeah. Some guy in a gray windbreaker, maybe late 40s. He asked if I was Cole Avery's son. I thought maybe he knew Dad from work or from the marina. I didn't say much. Why? Mara sat down hard on the arm of the couch because her knees had stopped being reliable. Listen to me carefully. Go straight home. Do not stop anywhere. Lock your doors. If anyone knocks, you call me before you answer. If anyone asks about your father, you say nothing. Mom. Tyler. Something in her voice must have reached him because his own changed immediately. Okay, I'm 10 minutes out. Call me when you're inside. I will. Is Emma okay? I'm calling her next. Mom, what is happening? Mara looked up and found Tanner watching the room with the patience of a man who knew fear had to move through its full cycle before reason could re-enter. I'm still sorting that out, she said. Just get home. When the call ended, her hand was shaking. She hit Emma's number before she could think too much. It rang 4 times. Hey, Mom. Where are you? Emma was 24, finishing her clinical rotations and carrying herself with the brittle independence of someone determined not to need too much from anybody. At the hospital, actually, not yours. I just got out of lab. Are you alone? A small laugh. This is a weird opening. Emma. The laugh vanished. I'm in the garage, walking to my car. Go back inside. What? Go back inside and wait near people. Do not leave alone. Now Emma heard it too. The fear under the words. What happened? I'll explain what I can. Not on the phone. Are you near security? Yes. Good. Stay where people can see you. I'm calling you again in 5 minutes. Mom, you're scaring me. I know. That truth nearly broke her. Emma lowered her voice. Is Tyler okay? Yes, stay put. Mara ended the call and stood. The living room looked different now. Not just like evidence. Like exposure. Every note on the floor, every photograph, every old route and hidden contact line reaching forward into people she loved. Tanner stepped toward the front window and shifted the curtain half an inch. Dark SUV on the corner, he said. She went cold all over. Yours. Mine would be closer. That was not comfort. Mara crossed to the hallway closet, pulled down the overnight bag she used for storm duty at the hospital, and set it on the couch. Tanner watched her begin to pack with the clean focus of a woman triaging damage before it spread. Medication. Cash. Chargers. Her laptop. The photograph of Patrick and Cole. The compass. The folded note. A change of clothes. The legal folder with Tyler and Emma's documents. She moved quickly, efficiently, because stopping to feel anything would have wasted time she no longer believed she had. "You expecting trouble tonight?" she asked without looking up. "I'm expecting attention." "That sounds like trouble wearing a better suit." He did not argue. Her phone rang. "Tyler." "I'm inside," he said the second she answered. "Doors locked. Check the windows." She heard him move through his apartment, heard the metallic slide of a latch. "Done. Keep your blinds closed." "Mom." She closed her eyes for 1 second. "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't apologize. Just tell me if I should call the police." Mara looked at Tanner. He gave the smallest shake of his head, not denial, not exactly. "More like later." "Not yet," she said. "Just stay put." Tyler was silent a beat. Then very quietly, "Does this have something to do with Dad?" She could not answer that, not honestly, not yet. "It has to do with old things reaching too far," she said instead. He exhaled, confused and unsatisfied. "That's a terrible answer." "It's the one I have." After the call, Mara stood very still with the phone in her hand. The rain thickened against the windows. The dark SUV remained where Tanner had seen it. A shape under a street lamp. An engine off. A presence that might have meant observation or timing or both. She felt the weight of the compass in her pocket and the old photograph in her bag. Patrick on the dock. Cole beside him. Jonah in a hospital bed calling himself her brother. Tyler being asked a question he should never have had to answer. Emma waiting under fluorescent garage lights for a mother who could not explain why she sounded afraid. Mara zipped the bag, lifted it, and looked at Tanner. "Tell me one thing plainly." He waited. "Am I protecting my family from the past," she said, "or from my husband?" Rain ran in thin lines down the front window. Tanner's face gave away almost nothing. Tonight there may not be a difference. The sentence stayed in the room after Tanner said it, hanging there between the rain on the windows and the open boxes on Mara's floor. For a second, she simply looked at him, waiting for him to take it back, or explain it, or soften it into something a mother could hold without feeling her stomach turn. He did none of those things. Mara picked up her phone again and called Emma back. This time, Emma answered on the first ring. "I'm inside." "Good, stay there. Mom's security keeps looking at me like I'm either in trouble or about to make trouble." "Let them." "That sounds encouraging." Mara looked toward the front window. The dark SUV still sat under the street lamp with its lights off. "Do not leave with anyone you do not know. If somebody approaches you, you go back inside and make noise." Emma was quiet for 1 beat. "This is about Dad, isn't it?" Mara closed her eyes. There it was again. The straight line her children kept drawing toward the one absence they had learned to live around. "It is about things connected to him." There was a sharp little breath on the other end. Not fear, exactly. Anger, trying to decide whether it had enough information to fully stand up. Connected how? "I'll tell you what I can when you're not standing in a parking garage." Emma lowered her voice. "Are you safe?" The question cut in a different place, coming from her daughter. Mara had spent most of her children's lives being the one who knew where the flashlight was, how high the fever really was, whether the storm was close enough to matter. She was not used to answering that question honestly. "For the moment," she said. Emma heard the compromise in it. "That's not good enough." "No," Mara said. "It isn't." After the call ended, she slipped the phone into her pocket and turned toward Tanner. "You said a car was coming. It's already outside, so the SUV is yours now." "No." He checked the time without looking at a watch. "Mine is 1 block over." Mara felt a chill move through her even in the warm house. "You let another vehicle sit on my street. I let it sit where I could see whether it was only curiosity or something more. And if it had been more," his eyes met hers, "then we would already be moving." The anger that came off that answer was clean and immediate. "You do not get to test the edges of my life." "No," Tanner said. "I get to keep it from narrowing." It was not enough. Nothing he said tonight was going to be enough. Mara knew that. He knew it too. She took one last look through the living room. The boxes, the photographs, the notes spread under the lamp. Her carefully arranged house now looked like a room in the middle of an investigation. She grabbed the stack she cared about most and slid it into her bag. The dockside photograph, the motel note, 3 of the shorter messages with route changes and warnings. She added her father's work shirt without entirely knowing why. Something about leaving it behind felt wrong. Tanner moved toward the kitchen and killed the overhead light. "Travel dark." Mara stared at him. "That phrase should not make sense in my kitchen." Tonight it does. The back of the house felt smaller with the lights off. She checked the lock on the patio door anyway. Habit, control, some useless act of order in the face of a moving target. Then Tanner touched 2 fingers lightly to her elbow. Not intimate, not soft, simply efficient. Now, the car waiting for her was a gray sedan parked with the engine running and no identifying markings anywhere on it. The woman behind the wheel had close, cropped blonde hair, a calm face, and the kind of watchfulness Mara associated with people who had seen panic often enough not to waste motion on it. She leaned over and pushed the passenger door open from inside. "Mara Quinn." Mara slid in. "That depends." The driver almost smiled. "Good answer." Tanner, still outside Mara, asked, "He's taking a different route." Of course he was. The sedan pulled away from the curb without headlights for the first half block. Only when they turned onto the next street did the lights come up. Mara twisted in her seat for one quick look back. Her house sat dark and still, curtains drawn porch bare except for the rain gathering along the rail. The SUV under the street lamp remained where it was. From that distance, it could have belonged to anyone. That made it worse. The driver took the city by side streets, first cutting through neighborhoods where televisions glowed behind blinds and porch lights cast warm squares on wet concrete. Jacksonville at night always felt stretched between worlds. Navy town, port town, hospital town, families asleep under one roof while freight moved under another. Mara had lived inside that rhythm long enough to trust it. Tonight, every intersection looked like a place someone could be waiting. The woman drove one-handed, the other resting near the center console but never quite on it. "What's your name?" Mara asked. "Lena Brooks." "You military." "Once. And now." Lena glanced in the mirror. "Driving." Mara let out a breath that almost became a laugh and then died before it arrived. "That tracks." They crossed one of the river bridges while rain misted the windshield and city lights broke apart on the water below. Cranes stood black against the harbor. A container ship moved slow and silent in the distance, all lit windows and hidden cargo. Mara watched it until the bridge dropped them back into streets lined with closed storefronts and chain-link fences. "You have children?" she asked suddenly. Lena's hands never shifted on the wheel. "A son." "How old?" 26. Mara looked at her profile. "Then you know what this feels like." Lena did not answer immediately. "I know what it feels like when someone reaches toward the wrong door." That was as much sympathy as Mara had gotten from anyone all day. She took it without comment. By the time they reached the service entrance of Mayport Harbor Medical Center, the rain had thinned to a damp shine on the pavement. Lena dropped her at a side corridor used mostly by supply vendors and night staff who knew the building too well to enter through the front. Tanner was waiting under a red exit sign jacket, damp at the shoulders, expression set. Mara stepped out of the elevator and saw at once that something had changed. "Where is he?" Tanner did not pretend not to know who she meant. "Gone." The word hit with stupid force. "Gone how?" "With help. Your help." His jaw tightened, not quite answer, not quite denial. "Not mine." Mara started toward him. He was post-operative. He should not even have been standing. He was moved. "That is not medicine." "No." Tanner held out a small, clear evidence bag. "It is survival. Inside was a motel key attached to a faded plastic tag. Most of the lettering had worn off, but one thing remained visible enough to read. A room number and the words St. Simon's. Mara took the bag and held it up under the harsh corridor light. What is this? The only location he trusted enough to leave behind. He left it for who? Tanner looked straight at her. You. That sent a fresh pulse of anger through her. You had this and you still told me almost nothing. I had a key tag, not a full map. Then explain what you do know. He gestured toward an empty consult room off the hall. Mara followed him inside because, whatever else Tanner was, he was at least a man who knew when not to have a conversation in the open. The room smelled faintly of old coffee and whiteboard marker. 2 chairs, 1 desk, no windows. Tanner closed the door behind them. Jonah was asking for this before he was even fully awake. St. Simon's. Then later another word, dunes. We think he was trying to connect it to one of your father's old fallbacks. My father had fallbacks. Your father had contingency plans nested inside other contingency plans. Mara stared at him. Say that again, but as if you are talking to a human being. A brief flicker crossed his face. Almost apology. Patrick Quinn believed in exits. He kept places, small ones, cash stored under names that did not point back to him. Boat slips, motel rooms, rental cottages used once every few years just to keep them from going dead in the system. Jonah knew some, not all, and Cole. The name sharpened the room all by itself. Tanner did not hesitate this time. Yes, Mara looked down at the worn key tag. So my father and my husband shared safe houses. They shared routes, at least at one stage. Her fingers tightened around the plastic bag. You say stage as if this was theater. In my experience, Tanner said quietly, most covert work is worse written. That should not have almost made her smile. It did anyway, only for a second. Then it was gone, and the room was hard again. He is alive, she said. Tanner did not move. Cole is alive. Still, he said nothing. She laughed once under her breath, the sound raw and thin. I am not even asking any more. I am hearing the silence. The lines around his mouth deepened. I cannot confirm location in this building. This building, Mara repeated. Not at all, not here. He said nothing. That was enough. All at once, every year of widowhood seemed to rearrange itself inside her. The funeral without a body. The paperwork. Tyler standing too straight in a borrowed suit. Emma refusing to cry where anyone could see it. Mara herself signing death-related documents with a hand so steady the clerk had called her brave. She had not been brave. She had been numb and busy and too exhausted to break in public. And somewhere under all of that, if Tanner's silence was what she thought it was, Cole Avery had still been breathing. Mara got up from the chair so fast it scraped loud against the tile. You let us mourn him. Yes, the answer was clean. No defense built around it. Somehow, that made it hit harder. She took one step toward him. My son sat in his father's jacket because it still smelled like him. Tanner stood his ground. I know. My daughter memorized old voicemails because she was afraid she would forget his laugh. I know. You know, Mara repeated and then shook her head because there were no words large enough for what she wanted to throw at him. She turned away and braced both hands on the desk. Behind her, Tanner waited. Did not interrupt, did not explain. For the first time since he entered her life, his silence felt less strategic than earned. When she finally turned back, her voice had flattened into something colder. Where do I go? He reached into his jacket and produced another item. Not a key this time. A folded piece of paper with a route written in block capitals. Highway numbers. A turnoff south of Brunswick. Final directions that dissolved into landmarks rather than street names. The motel key was a way station, he said. This is where Jonah was probably trying to reach. Probably. It is the best line we have. Mara took the paper. Who else has this? No one who will get there before you. The phrasing snagged. Before me. So you are sending me into it. I am giving you the one path Jonah crossed a gunshot wound to protect. You still talk like a man who thinks that helps." For the first time all day, Tanner looked tired. Not physically. Worn in some deeper place. "Nurse Quinn, he said there are times when the safest thing is to move before the map closes over you." She thought of Tyler behind locked apartment doors. Emma still inside a lab building because her mother told her not to walk into a parking garage alone. A dark SUV sitting too long on a residential street. The photograph. The notes. Cole's face in fading docklight. Her chest tightened around the truth that had already begun to take shape. If Cole was alive, then every explanation she had ever built around his absence had been built on air. If Cole was alive and hiding, then someone wanted him enough to reach for the children he left behind. If Jonah had bled his way into her hospital just to get her moving, then standing still was not safety anymore. It was delay. "I need to see my children first." No. The refusal came so fast and flat, she looked up like she had been slapped. "You do not get to say no to that." "I do tonight." Tanner held her stare. "Eyes are already on the known lines around your family. Your son's apartment, your daughter's campus routes, your house. If you move visibly between all three, you make a pattern. Patterns get read." Mara hated that the logic made sense. She hated even more that she was being asked to choose within it. "Then I call them." "You do that." She did. "Tyler first," he answered in a whisper. "There's a car across the street." Mara's whole body went cold. "Describe it." "Black SUV. Tinted windows. Might be nothing. My landlord keeps staring at it from his blinds like he's about to become a neighborhood vigilante." Mara closed her eyes for 1 second, steadying herself with the edge of the desk. "Stay inside. Do not confront anyone. Do not leave for food, for work, for anything. That implies I was planning to go out for tacos in the middle of this." His attempt at humor nearly undid her. "Tyler." His voice softened at once. "I'm staying put." "Good." A beat of silence passed. Then very quietly, "Is Dad alive?" It was the question underneath all the others. It had been underneath them for years. Mara looked at Tanner. He did not move. Did not rescue her. Could not. "I think," she said carefully, "there are things about your father that were not what we believed." Tyler let out a long breath, the sound of a man trying to keep his balance on a floor that had shifted under him. "That is an awful sentence, Mom." "It is. Are you in danger?" "Yes." He went silent. Then, with a steadiness that hurt, "Tell me what to do." Mara swallowed against the burn in her throat. "Lock everything. Answer no questions. If anybody says they know me or knew your father, you still answer nothing. If someone knocks, call me before you open the door." Done. When she ended that call, Emma was next. Her voice came clipped and furious the second she answered. "I have been sitting beside a vending machine for 40 minutes because apparently my family is now a procedural crime drama. Stay where you are." "No, explain." Mara drew a breath. "I can't do it all on the phone." "That sounds like a choice." "It's a limit." Emma was quiet. Not convinced, but listening. "Am I safe?" Mara looked at the route paper in her hand and the motel tag in the other. "You are safer surrounded by people than alone in a garage. Stay until someone I trust comes for you." "Who do you trust?" The question landed like a blade, because the honest answer was not enough people. Maybe no one at all. "I'll text you a name when they arrive." Emma exhaled hard. "If this turns out to be about one more secret Dad kept, I am going to break something expensive." Mara almost said, "He will deserve that." The words rose and stopped. She had no right to spend her daughter's anger for her. "Stay inside," she said instead. After the calls, she put the phone down and looked at Tanner again. "Who picks up my daughter?" "Lena Brooks." "The driver?" "Yes." "Good." He gave one brief nod. "You need rest before you drive." "No, I need motion." "Then at least eat." "I'm not hungry." That was not the point. He left and came back minutes later with a vending machine sandwich and bottled water that tasted faintly of hospital plastic. Mara ate because she understood triage, and because shaking on the highway would help no one. She changed out of scrubs in an on-call room, trading them for jeans, a dark sweater, and the old rain shell she kept in her locker. When she slipped the compass into the pocket, the weight of it felt strangely final. Not like comfort, more like instruction. By the time she walked back into the service corridor, Tanner was waiting with her bag. "Vehicle's downstairs," he said. "You're not coming. Not with you. Because if I arrive first, everyone runs. If you arrive first, maybe they stay still long enough to talk." Mara studied him. "That is a gamble." "Yes." "On me." "Yes." She held his gaze. "If my children get touched while I am on this road." "They won't." That was not a question. Something like steel answered from inside him. "They won't." The parking structure smelled of wet concrete and old oil. Mara's SUV sat near the far column under a flickering light, exactly where Lena had arranged for it to be brought. On the passenger seat lay a fresh first aid kit, 2 extra bottles of water, and a plain envelope with cash inside. Tanner handed her the keys. "Coast Road after Brunswick, then Inland Cut. Do not stop unless you have to. If you feel watched, you keep driving. You say that like I have done this before. Not this." He stepped back. "But you know how to hold steady when the room goes bad. Roads aren't that different." Mara opened the driver's door, then paused. "Why are you helping me?" The question sat between them under the electric buzz of the garage lights. Tanner looked past her for a second, somewhere over the line of parked cars, then back. Because somebody should have made cleaner choices years ago. It was the nearest thing to confession she had heard from him. She got into the SUV before either of them could ruin it. The road out of Jacksonville felt longer than it should have. Interstate, then bridge, then stretches of dark highway lined by pines and industrial yards and clusters of gas stations glowing under hard white light. The rain had passed, leaving the asphalt slick and reflective. Each set of headlights behind her lingered too long in the mirror. Each truck in the next lane looked like cover for something she could not see. Mara drove with both hands on the wheel, and the route sheet unfolded on the console beside her. At some point, the city gave way to long black sections of marshland. Water flashed silver beyond guardrails. The radio stayed off. She did not want voices. She had enough of those already old and new overlapping in her head. Patrick's voice first. Maybe north isn't the problem. Then Jonah's. "Open the compass." Then Tyler in a whisper. "Is Dad alive?" And under all of it, the memory of Cole's silence in the final years of their marriage. The missed dinners. The calls taken outside. The way he always parked where he could see the street. Mara had called it distance. Then stress. Then grief she could not reach. She had never once called it training. Traffic thinned after midnight. Florida gave way to the Georgia line almost without ceremony. One state marker. One dark sweep of border road. Then more marsh, more water, more stretches where the world narrowed to lane paint and the cone of her headlights. Her phone buzzed once on the seat. A message from Emma. "Driver here. I hate everything." A minute later, another from Tyler. Still inside. SUV gone. Mara let out a breath she had not realized she'd been holding. Gone did not mean safe. But it meant movement. It meant somebody else had chosen a next step she could not yet see. Right now, that was enough. She crossed the Sidney Lanier Bridge with the windows cracked half an inch, letting in the damp, salt air and the low, mechanical hum of the harbor. Ships lay out in the darkness like lit cities torn loose from land. The sight of them pulled something old through her. Childhood roads with Patrick. Dock lights at midnight. The smell of rope and diesel and wet wood. The half-familiar world he had apparently never fully left behind. South of Brunswick, she left the main road following Tanner's directions toward narrower pavement and fewer lights. The names on the route sheet became less municipal and more local. A bait shop long closed. A church with a white steeple visible only in the sweep of her headlights. A roadside stand with no sign and a hand-painted crab nailed above it. The geography itself felt like an older language one Patrick Quinn might have trusted because it did not look important enough for anyone else to memorize. At last, she saw the turnoff. No marker, just a break in scrub brush and a stretch of shell road leading toward darkness. She pulled in. The tires crunched softly over gravel and sand. Dune grass leaned silver under a rising moon. The Atlantic announced itself before it became visible first as pressure in the air, then as a steady pounding beyond the rise. Not loud, immense. Mara slowed near a weathered split-rail fence and killed the headlights. The cottage sat farther ahead than she expected, tucked low behind the dunes as if trying not to cast a silhouette. Gray boards. Small porch. Windows dark except for the faintest thread of amber somewhere deeper inside. She did not get out right away. Instead, she sat in the quiet of the engine ticking down and looked at the shape of the place through the windshield. A safe house, a fallback, a door in the sand built by men who trusted disappearance more than explanation. Somewhere inside that dark structure were years of her life reassembled without permission. Her phone showed no new messages. Signal weak. Time slipping past 1 in the morning. Mara took the compass from her pocket and held it in her palm. The needle still drifted, useless and stubborn. Her father had left her a broken guide and a sentence. That was either cruel or the best he could do. Maybe both. She opened the door and stepped into the cold wind. Sand shifted under her shoes. The sea moved beyond the dunes like iron under the moon. Her bag felt heavier now, not from the weight of paper, but from what the paper had become. She climbed the short porch steps and tried the handle. Unlocked. Of course. Men like Patrick and Cole had probably never believed in safety that depended on a bolt. They would rather hear danger coming. Mara pushed the door open and stepped inside. The cottage smelled like cold coffee, sea-damp dust, and one careful man's loneliness. A table stood near the front window with nautical charts spread in ordered layers, a radio unit beside them, and a cleaning kit laid out with exacting neatness. A jacket hung over the back of a chair. A mug sat in the sink with a dark crescent of dried coffee clinging to the bottom. All of it said occupied, recently, not abandoned, not memory. Mara closed the door behind her and stood still long enough for her eyes to adjust. From somewhere in the back of the cottage came the faint sound of movement. Not the loose creak of an old house settling, not wind pushing at a warped frame. Something measured, human, weight placed carefully then shifted. Mara did not move toward it right away. She stood just inside the doorway with one hand still on the knob listening. The ocean pressed against the dunes outside in its steady and different rhythm. Inside, the quiet had changed shape. Occupied silence now. A held breath. There was a narrow hall off the main room. One closed door, one half open. A rectangle of dim amber light stretched across the floorboards from somewhere deeper inside. Then a shadow crossed that light. A man stepped into the hall and stopped. For one impossible second, Mara's mind refused to make him real. He was older than the photograph on her rug and harder than the man she had buried in paperwork. The face was leaner now. More weather in it. More nights without sleep. There was gray at his temples and a thin scar near the line of his hair. But none of that mattered. She knew him before thought could catch up. Knew the slope of his shoulders. Knew the way he stood with his weight balanced, as if every room required an exit. Knew the exact shape of the silence that gathered around him when he did not yet trust his own voice. Cole Avery stopped in the doorway to the hall and looked at her like a man had looked at a ghost and found it looking back. Mara. That was all he got. She crossed the room in 3 fast steps and hit him across the face hard enough that the crack of it snapped through the cottage and vanished into the ocean noise outside. Cole took the blow without lifting a hand. His head turned with it. When he looked back at her, there was no anger in his face, only something worse. something open and exhausted and already braced for more. "You do not get hello," Mara said. Her voice came low and shaking from a place too deep to steady. "You do not get relief. You do not get to stand there breathing after 5 years of being dead." Cole swallowed. A red mark was already rising across one cheek. "I know." "No." She took another step toward him. "You know the outline. You do not know Tyler in a suit at your memorial because there was no body to bury and he thought being upright would help. You do not know Emma memorizing your old voicemails because she was afraid she'd forget the sound of you. You do not know me sitting across from a clerk arguing over whether a death certificate could stay open another week because some stubborn part of me still thought a phone would ring." Every word landed. She saw each one hit and stay lodged. Cole did not interrupt. He stood there and let her say it. "You do not know what it costs," Mara said, "to explain an empty chair every holiday for 5 years." His voice, when it came, was low enough she almost did not hear it over the sea. "No, I know what I chose. That is not the same thing." Something moved in the back room. Mara's eyes snapped towards the sound. A figure shifted in the doorway there, pale in the low light, one hand braced against the frame. Jonah. He looked worse than he had in recovery. Color washed out of him. Shirt half buttoned over a bandage at his side. Sweat at his temples. He gave Mara a tired look that almost counted as apology. "I was hoping he'd get the first slap," Jonah said. Mara turned back to Cole. "You brought him here." Cole looked toward Jonah once quick and assessing, then back to Mara. "He brought himself and nearly tore his stitches doing it. That does not answer the part where he had to leave a hospital bed." "No," Cole said. "It doesn't." The room smelled faintly of coffee gone cold and salt-damp wood and the clean edge of gun oil. Mara saw it now on the front table. Not just charts and radio gear. A field cleaning kit. Ammunition stacked beside it. A world she had lived next to without ever fully seeing. She looked at Cole again. 5 years dead. 5 years alive. 5 years somewhere behind walls she had never been allowed to touch. How long, she asked. He understood the question she meant. Since the retrieval off the Carolina line. That was the official version of the job where he had disappeared. Storm damage assessment. Contract marine recovery. The quiet, practical lie that had been easy to accept because it sounded like work he had actually done. "So you let us bury you." I let the file say what it needed to say. Mara laughed, once sharp and disbelieving. "You still talk like that." Cole's face tightened. "There was no version where I came home and they did not use you. You do not get to tell me what version of my own life I could survive." His gaze held hers. "If I had told you, you would have helped me. Of course I would have. That is why I could not." The answer was so immediate, so stripped of performance, that it made her angrier than an excuse would have. "You should have trusted me." Cole let out a breath through his nose, almost like pain. "If I trusted you, I risked Tyler. Emma. You." I had already seen what they did when a known line stayed visible. "You do not call that love." He looked at her then with a grief so unguarded it almost made her look away first. "No," he said. "I call it triage." The word hit her like a betrayal inside a betrayal. Triage was hers, her language. The thing she had used for 30 years to make impossible decisions feel survivable. She wanted to tell him he had no right to borrow it. Wanted to strip the word out of his mouth and throw it into the sea. Instead, she said, "Do not use my work to justify what you did to my family." Cole did not defend himself. "I'm not." Jonah had made it to a chair near the kitchen wall and lowered himself into it, one slow inch at a time. He pressed one hand to his side and shut his eyes for a second as if holding himself upright required negotiation. Mara saw it automatically. Fresh strain in the face. Breathing too shallow. No business being awake, much less in a beach cottage in the middle of nowhere. "You're bleeding again," she said. Jonah opened one eye. "Your bedside manner could use warmth." She crossed to him at once because whatever else this room had become, someone was still wounded in it. She tugged at the edge of his shirt and saw the dark bloom spreading through the bandage beneath. "Cole," she snapped without looking up. "Where are your supplies?" He pointed toward a cabinet by the sink. "Top shelf." She went there fast. Gauze, saline, tape, suture kit. Pain pills and a bottle with the label peeled off, of course. Everything in the cottage was arranged with the kind of care that came from long practice and zero expectation of help. By the time she turned back, Cole had moved to Jonah's side. Mara stopped short for the smallest fraction of a second at the sight of them together in the same light. Jonah, pale and worn, carrying Patrick Quinn's eyes more than his face. Cole, older braced, silent. One, the life Patrick had hidden. One, the life Mara had built with and lost. Standing near enough to touch in a room none of them should have shared. She set the kit down on the table with more force than she meant to. "Lift your shirt." Jonah obeyed without argument. The bandage was soaked through at one edge where movement had reopened the wound. Not catastrophic yet, but on the road there if ignored. "You drove here like this," Mara said. "No," Jonah said. "I bled here like this." Driving was the easier part. Cole passed her the scissors before she asked for them. She hated that he knew what she would need before she spoke. Hated more that some buried part of her body still recognized the old rhythm between them. One moving, one already reaching. She cut away the dressing, cleaned the edges, checked for swelling, for hardness, for the wrong kind of warmth. Jonah gritted his teeth and said nothing until she pressed along the angry line of the incision. "There it is," he muttered. "Be still." "Yes, ma'am." Cole almost smiled. Mara saw it in the corner of her vision and refused to look up. When the fresh dressing was finally in place and taped down tight, she stripped off her gloves and turned to the counter to wash her hands in cold water from the sink. The pipes shuddered before giving it to her. She stared at the little pink eddies spiraling toward the drain. Behind her, Cole said Tyler and Emma. She shut off the tap and turned. "You do not get to start with their names like nothing happened. I need to know they're covered." "Covered," Mara repeated. "That is what this is to you." His voice stayed quiet, protected. "You mean watched." "Yes. At least he had the decency not to pretend otherwise." "They're alive," she said. "They are angry. They are frightened. They have no idea what their father really is or was, or why strange men are asking them questions." Cole took that without blinking. She could see the effort in it anyway. "Are they with Tanner's people?" "For now." He nodded, once a hard little movement that looked more like pain than relief. Mara leaned back against the counter. "Start talking." Cole looked at Jonah first, then at the shuttered windows, then finally at Mara. Patrick copied part of an old archive before he died. Not all of it. Enough names and account lines and family chains to hurt people who still think the old compartment belongs to them. "Compartment," Mara said. Not unit, not agency, always a word with no edges. That was the point. He moved to the front table and touched the corner of a weathered map. It started as maritime recovery. Things lost at sea. Hardware bodies evidence cargo nobody wanted found in daylight. After a while, it grew other uses. Transfers. Deniable movement. Cleanups after operations that couldn't afford witnesses. Men were kept off books, or only half on them. Your father wasn't military in the formal sense. He was useful. That mattered more. Mara crossed her arms. "And you?" Same answer. Different generation. Jonah gave a faint sound that could have been agreement or disgust. Patrick told everyone they were temporary. The jobs, the routes, the compromises. Then temporary lasted 20 years. Cole's face did not change. By the end, he knew the archive was poison, so he gave it to you. He split it. Mara looked between them. "Into how many pieces?" Jonah answered this time. "As many as he thought it would take to stop one betrayal from killing everybody." Helpful. It made sense to him. That did not surprise her at all. Patrick Quinn had never trusted a single lock when he could build 3 smaller ones and put them in different rooms. Cole opened a drawer in the front table and brought out a metal case about the size of an old briefcase. He set it on the wood with care. Mara's eyes fixed on it at once. That's part of it. Yes. Jonah leaned his head back against the chair and shut his eyes again. His part. Mara walked to the table but did not touch the case. She could hear the sea under the floorboards now, or maybe that was only the blood in her ears. What is inside? Names, payment routes, coastal properties, support contacts, men who stayed in business after the mission died. Men who learned old operations could still move money if nobody ever dragged them into daylight, and family chains. Cole met her eyes. Yes, Mara thought of Tyler at his kitchen window. Emma sitting beside a hospital vending machine pretending the world still made sense. Her father writing instructions into hidden compartments as if everyone around him were pieces on a board he alone could read. Anger moved through her again, but now there was something colder under it. Who wants it? Cole's mouth flattened. A piece of what used to be inside that compartment. Contractors, former handlers, private intermediaries, men who built new businesses on old favors. No single head anymore, just overlap and appetite. That is a terrible answer. It's the true one. A wash of headlights slid across the front curtains. Every head in the room turned. The light moved once over the wall and was gone. Cole was already in motion before Mara had fully registered why. He crossed to the table, pulled open a shallow drawer, and came up with a sidearm. Down, he said. The first shot blew through the front window and burst the lamp on the side table in a spray of glass and sparks. Mara hit the floor by instinct. Jonah tried to rise and nearly folded from the pain. Cole caught the back of his shirt with one hand and shoved him lower behind the kitchen island just as a second burst chewed through the frame above where his head had been. The cottage filled at once with noise and impact. Splintering wood, falling glass, the flat, hard crack of gunfire too close to mistake for anything else. The sharp stink of powder rolling into the room. Mara crawled to Jonah and dragged him the rest of the way behind the island. Stay down. He sucked in a breath through his teeth. That seems wise. Cole moved low along the wall and fired twice through the broken front window, controlled and quick. Outside, tires ground in sand. A man shouted something she could not make out over the surf and the ringing in her own ears. More rounds hit the cottage. One slammed into the cabinet above the sink and blew it open in a shower of shattered dishes. Another punched through the door frame and buried itself somewhere deeper in the hall. Jonah clutched at his side. Blood was already blooming through the fresh dressing. Of course it was. Mara ripped open the medical kit with fingers that steadied the instant they touched gauze. Pressure first. Always. Hands remembered even when the rest of her had no room left for thought. Cole dropped into cover beside them for one beat, checked the magazine, then looked at Mara. Can you move him? I can keep him from dying for the next 5 minutes. Pick the miracle you want. That almost got the ghost of a laugh out of Jonah. Almost. Another round shattered the back window this time. 2 sides, Cole said. Maybe 3. He leaned out just enough to return fire toward the rear of the cottage. Mara heard a shout cut off outside, then the heavy scatter of feet changing direction in sand. Jonah gripped the edge of the island with whitening knuckles. This is really where you shine. Mara pressed harder on the wound. Bleed quieter. Cole looked toward the narrow hall. There's a floor hatch in the closet. Mara glared at him from across Jonah's body. You built a bunker under a beach cottage. I built options. Of course you did. The radio on the front table burst into sudden static. Then a voice snapped through it. Avery. Answer. Chief Tanner. Cole lunged, staying low, and grabbed the handheld mic. You took your time, Traffic Tanner said. Even now, under gunfire, the answer was so dry it nearly sounded absurd. Cole keyed the mic again. 3 shooters, minimum, front and rear, maybe more in the dunes. Hold. Outside, engines roared closer over the sand from a second direction. The sound of incoming fire changed almost at once. Shorter bursts now. more disciplined. Someone yelled. Tires spun hard. The men outside the cottage stopped controlling the perimeter and started breaking from it. Mara kept both hands pressed to Jonah's side and counted breaths because it was the only thing in the world she could do for the next few seconds. 1, 2, 3. He was still conscious. Pupils tracking. Skin too pale. Sweat cooling at his temples. Cole fired one more time through the front opening, then held position with the gun angled low, and his head turned slightly as he listened. The exchange outside collapsed almost as suddenly as it had begun. One vehicle fishtailed hard enough to spray sand against the wall. Then came only the ocean, the wind, and the high metallic ring that follows close gunfire in a small space. Nobody moved for a full 5 seconds. Then boots pounded up the porch and through the doorway. Tanner entered first with 2 armed operators behind him. He took in the room in a single glance. Broken glass, bullet strikes, Mara on the floor with blood on both hands. Jonah half-folded against the cabinets. Cole crouched near the wall with the weapon still in his grip. Tanner swore once low and sincere. Can he travel? Mara did not look up. Not far, not fast. Not unless you want me doing chest compressions in the back of a truck. Tanner nodded. Then we work here first. One of the operators moved to the windows. Another swept the back hall. Cole rose and crossed to the shattered front with Tanner, both men, scanning the dunes beyond the porch while talking in quick stripped-down lines too tactical for Mara to follow completely. She caught fragments anyway. 2 vehicles, 1 wounded, shell casings left, sloppy exit, not random. Jonah opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. Do we get a punch card for family emergencies? Mara did not indulge him. Save your oxygen. A medic knelt on Jonah's other side moments later, younger than she expected, steady hands, no visible ego. Mara gave him the wound status in clipped phrases and was grateful when he listened without trying to reclaim the scene. Together, they got a stronger pressure dressing in place and started fluids from a field bag that hissed softly when the line opened. Only when Jonah stopped actively leaking through the gauze did Mara push herself upright. The cottage looked as if a storm had chosen it personally. Glass glittered across the floorboards. Wind moved through the broken front window in cold, uneven breaths. One wall carried fresh bullet scars beside a map of the coast, pinned with colored tacks. The coffee mug in the sink had tipped during the shooting, and now lay on its side in a brown crescent stain. Cole stood at the table with Tanner, the metal case between them. Mara crossed to them, wiping her hands on a dish towel she found hanging by the stove. The blood had already dried tacky along the lines of her skin. Tanner looked at her once and then at the case. This is 1 fragment. Cole touched the lid. Mine. You kept it intact. I kept enough. Mara stared at the case, open it. Cole hesitated only a second before flipping the clasps. Inside lay sealed envelopes, a flash drive wrapped in plastic, and a field notebook swollen from moisture and age. No gold, no diamonds, no movie version of a secret. Just paper and memory, and the kind of information that could turn families into targets. Mara felt oddly disappointed by how ordinary it looked. Then she caught herself. Of course it looked ordinary. The deadliest things often did. Tanner picked up 1 envelope, checked the seal, and set it back down. If this goes through formal channels, it disappears, or gets cut up so many ways nobody can prove who owned what. Cole's voice stayed flat. If it stays entirely buried, they keep coming. Jonah, pale against the cabinets, managed to lift his head enough to look toward them. The Gulf copy is gone. My mother burned what we had after Patrick stopped showing up. There isn't a full set anymore. There's leverage, not purity. Mara looked from one man to the next. Tanner with his permanent caution and old guilt. Cole with the face she knew and did not know. Jonah, bloodless and stubborn, carrying half a lifetime of other people's secrets under fresh bandages. And under all of that, her children. Tyler looking out through blinds at a parked SUV. Emma angry enough to keep herself from shaking. A house she had lit with careful routines now sitting dark behind drawn curtains. No one in this room was going to decide the shape of that risk for her again. "How many names in here lead to living families?" she asked. Cole did not answer immediately. Enough to end people who never chose any of this. Yes. Tanner watched her closely. Mara. She held up one hand and he stopped. For 30 years, she had made choices inside bad minutes. Which airway first? Which blood pressure mattered most? Which patient could wait 20 seconds more, and which one would be dead for it? Triage was not kindness. It was selection under pressure. Save what you can. Buy time where you cannot cure. Accept that every clean answer becomes dirty the second enough people start bleeding. She looked at the envelopes again. One copy, she said. No one spoke. One limited copy of enough material to make them back off now. Payment lines, property links, names high enough to hurt and specific enough to scare them. Not family chains, not secondary contacts, not anything that pulls Tyler or Emma into paper. Tanner's expression did not change, but his focus sharpened. And the rest. Stays split. Mara met Cole's eyes, hidden in more than one place. If anyone comes near my children again, everything breathes. The ocean pressed its weight against the cottage outside. Wind moved through broken glass. Somewhere behind them, the medic adjusted Jonah's IV line and checked the dressing for fresh seep. Cole looked at Mara with something like recognition and sorrow tangled together. That will hold for a while. This is not forgiveness, she said. His face tightened, but he nodded. I know. She looked toward Jonah. And this is not trust. A corner of his mouth lifted despite the pain. Wouldn't dream of rushing you. Tanner closed the case halfway, leaving one envelope aside. I can move a controlled version of this through a channel that still understands consequence. Mara gave him a flat look. That sounds dangerously close to faith. It isn't faith, he said. It's pressure applied in the right direction. For once, that one landed. He accepted it. Cole took the chosen envelope and slid it across the table toward her instead of Tanner. Mara looked down at it. Her name was not written there, but it might as well have been. For all the years, men around her had made private decisions and called them necessary. This one was hers. Not clean, not good, only hers. She put her hand over the envelope. Tyler and Emma do not stay in the dark, she said. Cole's eyes lifted to hers at once. No, not anymore. Not behind my back. Not for their own good. Not for yours. No. The second answer cost him more than the first. She could hear it. Tanner let the lid of the case fall closed and snapped the clasps shut. We need to clear the site before daylight widens this problem. Mara almost laughed at the phrase, widens this problem, as if any of this had edges left. The medic rose from Jonah's side. He can be moved with support. Jonah opened one eye. That sounds less than enthusiastic. It means don't stand up alone, Mara said. I treasure your tenderness. Cole crossed to help Jonah, but paused when Mara stepped in first. For 1 second, all three of them hovered in the same narrow space of instinct and unfinished history. Then, Mara slid an arm around Jonah's back and let him lean as much as he needed. Cole took the other side. Together, they got him upright. Jonah let out a thin sound somewhere between pain and dry amusement. This is humiliating, no, Mara said. Humiliating would be if you pass out on my shoulder. Noted. They moved him carefully toward the back room where a cot waited under a narrow window. The mattress was thin, the blanket army plain. Nothing about the room had been built for comfort, only survival between storms. Cole helped lower Jonah onto the cot. Mara adjusted the pillow behind his head and checked the line one more time. His pulse was still too fast, but stronger than before. Good enough for now. Sometimes good enough had to count. When she straightened, Cole was watching her, not in the old husband way, not in the easy way they had once had with each other before the absences grew teeth. This was different. A man seeing the full cost of who he had left to carry everything when he vanished. Mara looked away first. She stepped back into the main room and found Tanner near the broken window speaking quietly into a secure phone. The early edge of dawn had begun to thin the darkness beyond the dunes. Gray, then silver, then the faintest lift of color above the waterline. The men outside were already working, shell casings collected, tracks photographed. One operator dragging a tarp over the worst of the broken glass where it had spilled off the porch. Efficient hands making violence look procedural. Mara stood in the middle of the room with the selected envelope in her hand and blood drying on her wrists. The cottage had stopped being a hiding place. It was evidence now, a confession with holes in the walls. Cole came up beside her, not close enough to touch. "You should sit down." She did not look at him. "You should stop saying things that make you sound like you still live in my house." A pause, then quietly fair. The sea kept moving under the paling sky. She watched it through the shattered glass. "Were you ever going to tell them," she asked, "if tonight hadn't happened?" Cole took longer with this answer than with any before it. "I had letters." Her eyes closed for one beat. "Of course you did. I rewrote them every few months. That is not the same thing." "No." She opened her eyes again and looked at him. "You should have trusted me." Cole held her gaze and did not try to soften the truth. "I trusted exactly what you would do. That was the problem. It hurt because it was true. Mara would have crossed lines. She would have lied, hidden, driven in the dark. Kept secrets from her own children if she believed it would keep them alive one more day." He had known that, known her well enough to weaponize her love against her choice. She hated him for it in that moment with an accuracy that almost steadied her, and somewhere under that hate was something more dangerous. Not forgiveness, not even understanding, just the knowledge that the man standing beside her had lived 5 years in a room like this, waking up every day inside the consequences of what he had done. Tanner ended the call and turned back toward them. "We move in 10. Mara nodded once. She slipped the envelope into the inner pocket of her bag beside the compass. Paper against brass. Old secret against older instruction. When the first hard stripe of sunrise touched the broken edge of the front window, the whole room changed color at once. Not warmer, clearer. Jonah breathed steadily in the back room. The metal case sat closed on the table. Cole stood silent at her shoulder. Tanner's people moved through the cottage with the grim competence of men who knew how much damage could still hide inside survival. Mara looked out at the Atlantic and felt with a strange and weary precision that nothing in her life had ended during the gunfire. It had only been dragged into the light. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, the cottage looked like the aftermath of a storm that had chosen one address and stayed there out of spite. Glass glittered across the warped floorboards. One wall carried 3 fresh bullet scars beside the coastal map. The lamp by the front chair was gone, entirely reduced to a twisted base and a scatter of white shards under the curtain. Wind moved through the broken window in cold breaths and carried the smell of salt and wet sand into everything. Mara had spent most of her adult life cleaning up after impact. Blood on tile. Shaking families. Charts that had to turn catastrophe into language the system could file. The cottage was no different in one way and completely different in every other. Damage was still damage. It still needed containment. It still needed decisions made before shock turned sloppy. Tanner's medic worked on Jonah in the back room, while Mara checked the dressing twice more than once again because her hands refused to trust what her eyes already knew. The bleeding had slowed to something survivable. His skin still looked wrong. Too pale, too cool, the exhaustion in him sinking deeper than the pain medication could touch. He had made it this far on will and blood debt. Now his body was trying to collect. At one point, he opened his eyes just enough to find her standing near the cot. "You look terrible," he whispered. Mara touched 2 fingers to his pulse and did not bother dressing the line in kindness. "That is because I am spending dawn in a bullet-ridden beach house with family." The corner of his mouth twitched once. Comforting. Rest. He closed his eyes again without arguing. That was how tired he was. Outside, the operators moved through the dunes in quiet lines, collecting what the night had left behind. Tire tracks, shell casings, one blood trail leading toward the scrub where somebody had made it to a vehicle, hurt enough to leave evidence in the sand. Nothing out there looked dramatic in daylight. The beach was still only beach. Wind, grass, drift. But Mara understood now how much violence could disappear into a place if the right people wanted it to. Cole stood on the porch with Tanner. Both men turned toward the horizon while they spoke in low voices. Mara could not hear the words over the ocean, but she knew the shape of the exchange anyway. Roots, exposure, containment. Men deciding what version of the truth was least likely to get more people killed. Men had always done that around her. The difference now was that she could see the structure of it. When Jonah was stable enough to move, Tanner came inside. "The envelope is ready." Mara straightened from the back room doorway. She had rinsed the blood from her hands as best she could, but the skin around her nails still held the faint pink memory of it. "And the rest? The rest stays divided," Tanner said. "Cole keeps his segment. I keep a Dead Man Switch copy of the limited set. Nothing with Tyler or Emma attached by name. Nothing that widens your family." The phrase was ugly, but she was too tired to fight it. Ugly was not the same as wrong. She stepped into the front room. The metal case sat closed on the table now, one selected envelope set beside it. The thing looked small enough to be stupid. Paper. One envelope. A narrow stack of names and routes and account lines that had already blown open decades of her life. Cole watched her from the far side of the room, saying nothing. Mara took the envelope and slid it into the inner pocket of her bag beside the compass. The two objects touched through the fabric. New leverage against old instruction. Tanner's gaze rested on the bag for a second, then lifted to her face. "One of my people takes Jonah inland. Another vehicle gets you back north. You do not return home first." "Where do I go?" "Mayport." Her head came up sharply. "The hospital. Top floor administrative office. Quiet. Secure enough for a conversation that should not happen in a parking lot." Mara understood at once what conversation he meant, and every muscle in her body seemed to go tight at the same time. "You told them." "Circumstances told Tyler first. Do not phrase it like weather." Her voice came out flatter than she intended. "Did you tell my children their father is alive?" Tanner answered in the same stripped-down tone he had used all night. "I told them enough that neither one walked into the next hour blind." That fury returned, but exhaustion sat on top of it, now heavy enough to dull the edge. She wanted to shout at him, at Cole, at Patrick Quinn in his grave, at the entire machinery of men who had moved truth around her life like freight, and then acted surprised when the crate broke open. Instead, she said, "You should have waited for me." Tanner did not argue the point. Yes, the simplicity of that nearly undid her. There was no defense in it. No justification. Only a fact laid down between them, too late to help. Mara looked toward Cole, then because not looking at him had become its own form of effort. "Do they know where you are?" "No." "Good." He absorbed that without visible reaction, but she could tell the word had weight. Good did not mean forgiven. Good only meant not yet worse. The vehicles split before the causeway. Jonah went first in a medical van that looked civilian from a distance and expensive up close. Mara stood beside the open doors while the medic secured the lines and the blanket around him. Jonah drifted in and out, but when the rear doors were almost closed, he forced his eyes open one more time. "Mara." She leaned in. "What?" "Do not let him disappear again." The words were barely louder than breath. Mara glanced once across the roadway where Cole stood with Tanner near the second vehicle, backlit by raw morning light off the water. Then she looked back at Jonah. "That depends," she said. It was the most honest thing she had left. The doors shut. Cole did not come with her. That had been her choice, made without saying the words out loud. There were some distances she could not close, and the same morning she learned they had been opened on purpose. He stood near the shoulder while one of Tanner's operators loaded the remaining gear. Wind tugged at his jacket and flattened it against his body. He looked like a man who had been living outdoors, even indoors, if that made sense. Alertness, not his posture, but his condition. Mara wondered how many nights he had slept lightly enough to hear tires on sand. Wondered what it had cost him every time he let his own name stay dead. She did not ask. When she stepped toward the SUV, Tanner had assigned her. Cole reached into his coat pocket and held out a clear sleeve containing folded paper. For Tyler and Emma, he said. Not all of it. Only enough to hear me without someone else translating. Mara stared at the sleeve and did not take it at first. You do not get to make yourself noble in a letter. His mouth tightened. I'm trying not to make myself absent again. That landed harder than apology would have. She took the sleeve, slipped it into her bag without promising anything, and got into the vehicle. The drive back to Florida passed in fragments. Harbor water under steel bridges. Lines of traffic thickening as day workers moved inland. Lena Brooks at the wheel again, saying almost nothing, her silence the competent kind that gives a person room to survive their own thoughts. Mara sat in the passenger seat with both hands clasped too tightly in her lap and watched the coast fall away mile by mile. Jacksonville resumed its ordinary face long before she was ready for it. Delivery trucks, coffee shops opening, a jogger at a stoplight waiting for the walk sign, a woman in scrubs buying gas with one hand while tying back her hair with the other. The normalcy felt obscene for 10 minutes, and then, like all normalcy after violence, it began to feel like relief. Mayport Harbor Medical Center rose over the harbor exactly as it had yesterday. Brick, glass, reflective windows catching light off the river. From the outside, it looked like a building where things became manageable if you moved fast enough and wrote clearly enough. Mara had believed that for a long time. She still wanted to. Tanner did not bring her through the public entrance. He took her up a back elevator to an administrative office on the top floor, where the blinds were half open and someone had placed a pot of coffee on a credenza in the corner, as if caffeine might soften catastrophe. The room smelled faintly of old paper and carpet cleaner. A legal pad sat on the desk, 2 chairs near the window. No one else inside yet. Mara stood in the middle of the office and set down her bag. They're here, Tanner said. Her heartbeat changed. Not fear, exactly, something more terrible. The knowledge that in a matter of seconds she would no longer be the only one standing in the full wreckage of the truth. What do they know? That their father is alive. The sentence hit cleanly, even though she had already known it was coming. She rubbed a hand across her face. Her skin felt tight, exhausted, not fully attached to her body. The door opened before she could answer. Tyler came in first. He had Cole's height and Mara's eyes, and at 28 still managed in bad moments to look both younger than his age and older than it. He stopped just inside the office as if he had not yet decided whether to close the rest of the distance. Mom. Mara crossed to him immediately and held him hard enough that for a second it felt like the only true thing in the room. Tyler's arms came around her shoulders with equal force, and she felt how tightly wound he was beneath the steadiness. Are you hurt? He asked against her hair. No. He leaned back enough to search her face. That answer is not convincing. I'm tired. That's different. His voice caught just slightly on the last word, and she realized how close he had been holding himself to panic all morning. The door opened again. Emma did not hesitate the way Tyler had. She came straight across the room and wrapped both arms around her mother, then stepped back just as fast with her jaw already tight and her eyes wet but furious. Say it plainly, she said. Do not soften anything. Mara looked at both of her children and knew there was no sentence in the language that could do this cleanly. Hospitals taught you how to deliver terrible news in stages, how to give people enough room to hear one fact before the next one arrived. This room had no room left. Your father is alive, she said. Silence. Tyler stared at her like meaning itself had become a problem. Emma blinked once, very hard, and then looked away toward the window and back again, as if the city outside might offer a less impossible shape to stand inside. Tyler spoke first. Alive where? That Mara said is complicated. Emma gave a short, disbelieving sound. Dead was complicated. Alive is yes or no. Yes. The word settled and did not leave. Emma turned away altogether, then, one hand over her mouth, shoulders rigid. Tyler lowered himself into the nearest chair as if his knees had lost interest in helping. "Did you know?" he asked. "No." He looked up sharply, searching her face for any crack that might suggest mercy or evasion. "Not before last night." "No." Emma turned back anger, now fully upright in her. Then who knew? Mara thought of Patrick Quinn, of Cole, of Tanner, of records hidden in brass compartments and motel rooms and beach cottages. Too many names, too many men who had looked at love and translated it into secrecy. Enough people, she said, far too many. Tyler scrubbed both hands over his face. Why would he do that? Mara opened her mouth and found that the rehearsed versions she had built in the car were useless here. Her children deserved cleaner language than systems and archives and risk chains. They deserved the central wound, because there were people tied to his work who believed the fastest way to reach him was through us, she said. Because he thought disappearing would keep you safer. Because he made a choice that hurt this family before anyone else could. Emma's eyes flashed. "That is not protection." "No," Mara said. "It isn't." The honesty of it shifted something in the room. Not enough to relieve the pain, but enough to keep them all standing in the same version of it. Tyler let his hands fall. His voice, when he spoke again, had gone quieter in the way that meant he was trying very hard to remain measured. "Did he stop loving us?" That one tore through her. "No," Mara said. That was never the part missing. She reached into her bag and pulled out the clear sleeve Cole had given her. Held it out. Tyler took it. Emma did not move toward it. "He wrote this," Mara said. "Read it when you want to. Or don't. Both are fair." Tyler looked down at the pages through the plastic but did not open them right away. Emma was the one who broke first, though not into tears. Into motion. She crossed to the far side of the office and stood with her back to them, hands braced on the windowsill, staring out at the harbor, where cranes and ships were already moving under the late morning sun. How many years, she asked, without turning around, did he wake up and decide we were better off grieving him? No one answered at once. Finally, Mara said, "I don't know." Emma nodded once, a hard little movement. "I hate that I still want to hear his voice." Tyler looked down at the letter in his hand. "That part's not on you." For a moment, the room held all three of their griefs separately. Mara did not try to hurry any of them. She had learned too long ago what happened when people were rushed through pain that had not yet found its shape. The days after that refused neatness. Officially, Mayport Harbor Medical Center documented a restricted trauma event involving federal jurisdiction and no further comment. Dr. Hollis complained loudly enough in a closed-door meeting to satisfy his integrity and then accepted the redacted paperwork because there was nothing else for him to accept. Jess Molina watched Mara with worried eyes and asked no direct questions, which in its own way was a kindness. The chart from that first night existed now in a version so cleaned of blood and motive that it might as well have described weather moving through a room. Mara signed what required her signature and left the building at the end of each shift, feeling as though she had helped bury a second body under better formatting. Jonah recovered first in a secure medical site inland. Then, 3 weeks later, because secrecy had a warped sense of humor, and Tanner believed the best place to hide an injured man with no useful official identity was in the house of the nurse who would notice when he lied about pain. Jonah arrived at Mara's bungalow with one duffel bag and a healing scar. The first morning, she found him in her kitchen wearing one of Tyler's old sweatshirts and making coffee badly. Mara stopped in the doorway and stared. Jonah looked up from the machine. "I can explain. You survived surgery, transport, blood loss, and an armed assault just to offend beans in my house." He glanced into the mug, considered it, then said, "That seems harsh, but fair." It was the first time either of them had been forced into ordinary light together. No hospital alarms. No broken windows. Just two adults standing in a kitchen with too much family history and not enough language for it. Living with him was awkward, in precisely the way blood can be awkward when introduced 30 years late. He moved quietly. Too quietly, sometimes. Mara would turn and find him already in a doorway without having heard him come down the hall. He rinsed his mug immediately after using it and folded blankets with military precision and stood at the back window longer than normal people stand at windows. When the house creaked at night, he woke. When a car idled too long on the street, he noticed. When the harbor wind changed before rain, he noticed that too. The longer he stayed, the more Mara saw their father surfacing in pieces she had not asked to inherit. The left hand curling when irritated. The habit of checking the deadbolt twice. The silence around certain memories that did not mean absence but crowding. One evening, she came home from a shift and found Jonah sitting at the dining table with the old dockside photograph in front of him. He looked up when she entered. He was taller than I remembered. Mara set down her bag. Memory adds inches to men who leave. Jonah nodded once as if that made immediate painful sense. They stood beside each other for a while looking down at Patrick Quinn, caught at dusk between sea and secrecy. "What was he like with you?" Mara asked. Jonah took time before answering. Funny when he forgot to be guarded. Restless? Half in the room even when he was fully seated. Guilty more than I knew then. Mara considered that. With me, he was warm in flashes. The kind of father who could make one perfect afternoon feel large enough to cover 6 weeks of absence. Jonah's mouth tightened. It never was. No, that was the first conversation they had that did not feel like interrogation. No proving, no demanding. Just two adult children standing over the same flawed man from opposite sides of a divided life. Cole did not come to the house. Not at first. Mara made that boundary and Tanner respected it enough to ensure the message landed exactly where it needed to. For a while, Cole stayed in motion, existing only through clipped updates from Tanner. He is alive. Nothing more unless Mara asked, even then, not always. Some nights she hated how much relief the sentence still carried. Tyler read the letter first. He did it alone at Mara's kitchen table after midnight, while the house slept around him, and Jonah kept politely out of sight in the spare room. Mara woke to the low scrape of a chair and found him there with the pages spread before him and both elbows on the wood, as if he were bracing against weather. In the morning, his eyes were red but dry. Did it help? She asked. He thought about it. No. Then, after a pause, but it sounded like him, Emma waited another week. She took the letter into the backyard just after dusk and read it under the old porch light while moths battered themselves softly against the bulb. When she came back inside, she folded the pages in half, set them on the counter, and stood looking at nothing for several seconds. "I still do not forgive him," she said. Mara nodded. "You do not have to." Emma drew in a breath and let it out slowly. "I just needed to know he remembered us as people, not collateral." Mara reached across the counter and took her hand. He remembered. Months would be required for anything softer than that. When Cole finally saw them, it happened in a borrowed marina office at dusk, with Tanner somewhere outside, and no one pretending the meeting was accidental or comfortable. The office, smelled of old rope diesel and paper damp from coastal air. A faded chart of the intracoastal waterway hung crooked on one wall. Through the window, boats knocked softly against their slips. Mara was there because Tyler and Emma wanted her there, not because she believed her presence would make the moment easier. Cole looked more nervous facing his children than he had under gunfire. Tyler noticed it too. Mara could tell by the way he straightened slightly, not in sympathy but in recognition. Emma folded her arms and kept a full desk's width between them. No one rushed toward anyone. Tyler spoke first. "You look older." A strained half-smile crossed Cole's face and vanished. "That would be the years." Emma's eyes narrowed. "Do not make jokes unless they're very good." "Fair." The conversation that followed had no cinematic shape to it. no speech large enough to heal 5 years. Tyler asked practical questions because that was how he loved when he was hurt. Where had he been? How often had he thought about contacting them? Why letters instead of truth? Emma asked the sharper ones. Did he understand what he had done to their mother? Did he believe fear gave him the right to choose grief for everyone else? If he had been alive all this time, why should any of them believe he would stay now? Cole answered every question, even when the answer made him look smaller, even when it stripped him down to almost nothing. He did not ask them to forgive him. Mara respected him more for that than she wanted to. When it was over, nobody hugged. Nothing easy happened. But Tyler let Cole say goodbye without turning away, and Emma took the second letter he offered instead of leaving it on the table. In that season for that family, it counted as movement. Autumn deepened. The hospital kept asking practical things of Mara, and practical things remained as ever the easiest kind to give. She trained a new nurse on trauma intake, argued with a resident over fluid resuscitation and won, worked through a storm surge that filled every bed and left her asleep in a chair with a chart open in her lap. The world of blood pressure and labs and medication times never paused to ask whether her personal life had become unrecognizable. That, oddly enough, was a comfort. Some evenings, Jonah sat at the kitchen table grating none of the books he claimed to be reading, his attention always half on the window. One night he said without looking up, "Do you think he was ever happy?" Mara knew at once which he meant, Patrick or Cole. Jonah considered either. She set down the dish towel in her hand. I think Patrick liked motion more than peace, and mistook the first for the second. Jonah nodded slowly. That sounds right. And Cole. This time she thought longer. Through the sink window the harbor reflected a smear of cold evening light. Cole was happy in pieces. At the kitchen table, on the water, teaching Tyler to fix a reel, pretending Emma was not outsmarting him by age 14. Jonah's mouth moved in the beginning of a smile. You still love him. Mara looked at him. Do not get ahead of yourself. That was not my question. No, it wasn't. She went back to drying the plate in her hand and said nothing more. Winter came in the damp, coastal way it always did. Never dramatic, just a coldness that found the cracks in doors and stayed there. One morning before dawn, after a shift that ended with one child saved and one old man lost, Mara stepped out through the staff exit into air that smelled of salt and diesel and the first hard edge of December. Behind her, the hospital doors opened and closed in their ordinary mechanical rhythm. Nothing like the violent burst that had started all of this. Still, she paused when she heard them. Some sounds once attached to the wrong night never fully returned to innocence. The parking lot lights burned pale over wet asphalt. Harbor cranes stood black against the paling sky. Mara adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and started toward her car. An unmarked truck waited near the far curb. She knew it before she got close enough to see faces. Not by the vehicle itself, by the shape of the pause it created in her. Jonah sat in the passenger seat, one hand on the dashboard, arguing with someone about the radio volume. Because this station is terrible, he said through the open window. Your taste is terrible, Cole replied from behind the wheel. Mara stopped beside the truck and looked from one man to the other. The sight still felt improbable enough to hurt. Not peace, not closure. Nothing simple enough for those words. Just alive, complicated. Breathing in the same cold morning, Jonah looked over at her. He gets defensive every time I touch the preset. Cole kept one hand on the wheel and glanced up. There was gray at his temples she still was not used to, a scar she had not kissed. 5 years of missing detail gathered quietly into the shape of his face. He reached across and pushed the passenger door open from the inside. Mara stood there 1 second longer, with the brass compass in her coat pocket pressing against her hip. It still did not point true. It never had. But it had carried a message long enough to matter. So she got in, The truck pulled away from the curb and headed toward the waking city while Mayport Harbor Medical Center receded in the side mirror. Only another building from a distance, only another place where blood and truth and silence had collided hard enough to split a life open and leave something else breathing inside it.